Millville, Iowa. Amid the farms and limestone hills, an old house once stood at the end of Skip Level Road. In November of 1959, the family that lived there, the Meyers, began experiencing strange phenomena. Bizarre material manifestations, objects moving by themselves. About a month later, they fled the home, never to return. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we will be discussing the fascinating case of the spook of Skip Level Road. This case occurred in the countryside near Millville, Iowa, at a house at the end of Skip Level Road. The house belonged to the Meyers, an elderly couple. Bill, 83, was born on the property and actually helped build the house in his teenage years, while Annie was 77 at the time of the incidents. Now, the first anomalous occurrences happened shortly before Thanksgiving in 1959. Now, at this time, Bill was actually recovering from a broken hip, so his bed had been moved downstairs into the living room so he could spend time with the family while he was recovering. One evening, Bill, Annie, and their teenage grandson Gene were relaxing in the living room when a loud noise resounded from upstairs. After turning the living room light on, they were shocked to find that Gene, as well as much of the room, had been covered in some sort of wet, gray soot or fine dirt. Now, the family found no source for the strange soot-like materials. The windows had been closed, the wood-burning stove was in good working order, and the walls and ceilings were all solid. Now, the house was quiet for a couple of weeks until the evening of December 15th. Once again, Gene was sitting with his grandparents when all present heard a loud thud. This time, however, the noise was the sound of a large flower pot, like pedestal thing, apparently jumping across the room and hitting the stove. This started apparent non-stop activity for the next couple of days, which included numerous moving objects such as door panels being smashed out, boards crashing through doors, furniture settling on its head, and the sound of 9 or 10 people on the roof of the house. At one point, clumps of mud were even found sticking to the walls. Even an old refrigerator was claimed to have tipped over, breaking milk-separating equipment and multiple dishes on a nearby table. Now, when the Meyers' son, Elmer, walked through the home with a local photographer, a large rock came out of one of the walls and smashed a nearby serving dish. Now, similarly, on a different occasion, he claimed that a bottle came out of a case and smashed onto the floor. One of the most dramatic incidents occurred when Annie claimed to witness a glass levitate through the air towards her and land on her head, shattering. Newspapers claimed that she suffered shock after leaving the house, fearful that she was going to lose her home. The Meyers decided to involve the local Clayton County Sheriff, Forrest Fisher, on the 18th of December 1959. By this time, they had vacated the house and were living with relatives, who informed the local papers that they weren't going to be moving back until the place was safe. Now, an ambulance driver who helped them move informed the sheriff that he had been there the night previous and everything was in order. However, Sheriff Fisher arrived the morning of the 18th to find the house in shambles, including a davenport or couch actually standing on its end. He claimed that he tidied up the house and left. When he returned later, he found that the house was, yet again, in shambles. This time, a big refrigerator had been overturned, and even a bed was upside down. Now, in his initial cleanup, he had decided to set glass items through the house to see if there was any sort of shifting of the foundations. Anything jarring enough to upset a couch would surely topple a glass. However, when he returned the second time, he found that all of the little glass objects were still as they had been, intact. Now, although the sheriff continued checking on the house, the phenomena seemed to cease, at least around him. A 38-year-old by the name of Patrick Livingston, a Great Lakes tanker pilot, decided to test the house with his brother Laurel and about 4 or 5 friends. Now, Pat was lying in bed the night of January 6, 1960, when he claimed to witness a wooden chair bounce across the floor for about 8 feet. He yelled for his companions, who arrived just in time for everything to settle down. He accused the other members of the group of, pranking him by pulling the chair with strings or something, but found no evidence of such fakery. Pat decided to simply go back to bed, and as he put it, the next thing he knew, he was on the floor. After feeling a slight shake to the bed, he claimed that the mattress flopped off the bed and took him with it. Pat and Laurel and their friends decided that enough was enough and vacated the house. However, a few hours later, around midnight, they decided to go back. They stayed up until around 1:30, but nothing more happened. However, Pat Livingstone and his friends were not the last people to attempt to witness the weird phenomena. However, they may have been the last people to actually succeed in witnessing it. A whole posse of students and other researchers from several local universities showed up with all sorts of equipment like Geiger counters and oscilloscopes to try and figure out what was causing these disturbances, and they were not the only ones. One newspaper claimed that as many as 2,000 people turned out to try and see the so-called haunted house. As a matter of fact, crowds of people would actually be turned away by police, and even then some still tried to get in. At one dramatic moment, a group of spectators actually broke in to the Meyers' basement. However, they were soon chased away by a few college students who used flashing strobe lights to blind them. As the Ames Daily Tribune put it, what started out to be a spook and goblin hunt just about ended up a brawl. Now, when the researchers finally got around to setting up their equipment at about 3 in the morning, perhaps unsurprisingly, nothing happened. Regardless of this outcome, though, the Meyers had had enough and vacated the property for good. According to one report, it became a haven for vandals, as haunted locations often do, until it was finally burned down by the local fire department in October of 1986. So this is a funky little case. The first thing that really attracted my attention to it was the discussion on the dust or soot. That's a weird detail, one that I've noticed across other encounters with the paranormal, whether it's UFOs, entities, ghosts, you name it. Specifically, John Keel discussed this aspect in another case where a woman witnessed a bizarre monk-like figure crumble into ash, as well as the strange green powder in the John Trasco entity encounter. Now, the fact that in this case it was described as wet soot is kind of a paradox in and of itself as well. Soot, of course, is connected to fire. If it was wet, it's connected to water. Interestingly enough, both spontaneous fires and kind of bizarre manifestations of random puddles of water are both connected to poltergeist lore. Now, it's really neat to see one of these great classic tropes to all sorts of encounters, even though it's especially prevalent with Sasquatch encounters, of something thudding on the outside of the room or house. Again, this is prevalent across every different type of paranormal phenomena, and I think that it really is kind of indicative of the other or the outside reaching in. Now, another very odd kind of side note, kind of segue. The description of 8 or 10 people on the roof of the house reminds me of all things, and again, fair warning, this is a segue, a witness statement from way back when one of my ancestors was tried for witchcraft by another of my ancestors in the 1600s. Talk about family beef. Now, this is quite the can of worms, but one of the occurrences he was supposedly charged with was, quote, the sound of horses running over a roof while he was out of town on business. Now, the validity of witchcraft accusations, let's just say there is no validity to them. However, the fact that the noise of something thudding overhead is, I guess, considered extra mundane enough as to cry witchcraft, that's kind of what just sort of reminded me of that. Again, I warned you it was a segue, but something that I just felt like mentioning. There's also just this vast amount of discussion that this case got across newspaper articles, with Elmer Meyer, the couple's son, insisting that there was nothing paranormal about it, that it was just simply the combination of a spring on one side of the property and a river on the other, as well as the prevalent limestone in the area, causing the house to settle. How this upset furniture like a bed and couch while leaving smaller items and everything else intact, as well as manifesting soot out of thin air, I don't know. It's really neat, though, because you have this modern take of paranormal researchers kind of agreeing with the folkloric precedent that these factors of, water in the area or even limestone, the composition of the earth, seem to somehow contribute to anomalous phenomena. Now, on the other side of the conceptual fence, researchers from one of the universities considered the concept that living people were haunting the house in the form of telekinesis. Of course, those that adhere to the concept of, poltergeist phenomena centering on a poltergeist agent were quick to point out that Gene, a teenager, was present for most of the initial phenomena. However, as time wore on, he wasn't around for a lot of the later upsets, such as Pat Livingstone being tossed out of the bed. Yet again, too, we have the fantastically annoying aspect that you have all this phenomena happening as long as nobody's recording it. The moment that someone sets out to actually find some sort of, quantitative proof of the event and pin it down and get it on film, the event itself is nowhere to be found. And, kind of on the flip side of that, what I really came away from this case sort of thinking about is the fact that you had this elderly couple who had lived there the two of them for a very long time, but Bill had actually helped build the place when he was a teenager. He was born on that property. And these events were so upsetting to them that they literally moved away from this place into an apartment. And, again, talking about quantitative proof of the paranormal, truthfully, I'm kind of to the point where I genuinely wonder if that's ever going to happen. I'm still setting out looking for it, but, I'm just not sure if that's even the most important part because, as far as, again, what researchers would consider anecdotal, what people would consider, not proof but something subjective, you see this effect on real people. A life kind of changing course. And to me, yeah, again, that's just a personal effect on the people witnessing this phenomena, but taken on a large scale, looked at in a cultural or societal way, that effect, I think, is the truly important aspect of the paranormal and something that is worth study. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the spook of Skip Level Road, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. And for today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.